really, oh, it's being
I
recorded.
apologize. I forgot to set up the recording and I want to make sure we get what you said because we have lots of people who signed up and somehow aren't here. I hope the Zoom outage didn't affect that.
No worries. Yes, I forget. It's easy to forget. Um, and I wanted to, another framework that I wanted to discuss is the social determinants of health. And so, for a little bit of context, the conditions in people's environments play a huge role in their health outcomes. And so, where we live, where we work, where we play and learn are just some of the factors that impact our health. Socioeconomic factors like income, access to education, access to nutritious food also shapes our health. And we really like to center this lens in the work that we do because it offers us a more accurate picture of the wider set of forces and systems that are shaping the conditions of our daily lives. And studies have actually shown that the social determinants of health have a greater influence on our health than things like genetic factors, access to healthcare, and lifestyle choices. And so I wanted to engage you all. And in the chat, I would really love it if folks could give their best guess. To what extent can social determinants impact a person's health? So, do folks think that it can impact 10% of our health, 30% of our health, 80% of our health? What is your best guess? You could also just unmute yourself since this is a small group and just say it out loud. Okay, I'm seeing 80%,
50%.
50%, 60%. Awesome. I went back. So the answer is that research actually shows that up to 90% of a person's health is tied to social determinants of health. So that's a pretty big percentage and is why we really like to include this lens in the environmental justice work that we do. And then really quickly, I wanted to share with you all, which I'm sure you've already seen this amazing graphic from Movement Generation and the Climate Justice Alliance, but this is also how we like to frame our work and our organizing, really focus on a just transition away from an extractive economy that depends on consumerism, a colonial mindset, as y'all's land acknowledgement acknowledged, militarism, exploitation, and extraction, and moving towards building the new to a living and regenerative economy that's based on values of caring and sacredness, ecological and social well-being, holistic well-being, and deep democracy. And so I wanted to give you all a little brief history of Physicians for Social Responsibility as a whole. It was founded in Boston, Massachusetts in 1961 by a group of doctors who were concerned about the health impacts of nuclear weapons. And this organization did a lot of work to educate the public about the dangers of nuclear war, and it actually grew into an international movement um, that was called the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, the IPPNW, in 1980. And the work that this group did actually culminated into the organization winning a Nobel Peace Prize in 1985. And so that is a picture of two of the founders receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. And so a little bit of history of Oregon PSR. The Portland chapter was founded by Karen Steingart, who was inspired to start the chapter after attending Harvard's symposium on the health consequences of nuclear weapons and nuclear war. And here is a picture of the poster. And the organization received its nonprofit status in 1981 and later merged with other chapters to form Oregon PSR in the 90s. And so we have been an organization for over 40 years. And I wanted to have another engaging activity and ask you all, what famous writer do you think was a member of Oregon PSR? I would love it if y'all, again, wrote your answer in the chat or you just unmuted. So do you think it's A, Catherine Dunn, B, Ken Casey, C, Beverly Cleary, D, Ursula K. Le Guin, or E, Chuck Palahniuk? I don't know how to pronounce that last name.
C.
You think it's B? Does anyone else have D?
Beverly Cleary, C.
Beverly Clear. Okay.
There are a couple of votes for Beverly Cleary, and I have no idea, so I'll go with that.
Okay. Okay. Well, the
What
answer,
about Ursula?
yes.
Ursula Le Guin.
So the answer is D. Ursula K. Le Guin was a member of Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I wanted to include a brief excerpt of her poem called Phoenicians, which was about the health concerns of nuclear war and weapons, and it reads, "We lived forever until 1945. Children have time to make mistakes, margin for error. Carthage could be destroyed and sown with salt. Everything was always, it would be all right." And so I wanted to, following up with that, give a brief explanation of our Peace and Justice program, which focuses on nuclear disarmament, the health effects of war, and commemorating the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. And so here is a video of the Portland Taiko Drumming Group who performed at last year's Hiroshima and Nagasaki commemoration at the Japanese American Historical Plaza. It's a really great event. I would highly recommend you all attend. It's organized by a whole bunch of organizations and community members, and it really is a beautiful, beautiful event. And now I'm going to pass it on to Anne to talk about nuclear energy and how it's not safe, not clean, and not needed.
Thanks, Samantha. Maybe you could go to the next slide. I apologize for my voice. I'm still getting over a cold. So as Samantha said, Oregon PSR began by taking a stance against nuclear weapons. Well, nuclear energy is really a byproduct of mining radioactive materials to build nuclear weapons, and came out of looking for a so-called peacetime use for these radioactive byproducts. Well, I'm certainly not an expert on nuclear energy, but I believe that the evidence is strong that it is, in fact, not safe, not clean, and not needed. In terms of being not safe, there's no permanent repository for radioactive waste in the US. And uranium mining is usually done on indigenous lands, which exposes workers and communities downwind to ionizing radiation causing cancer, birth defects, and genetic defects that can be passed on to future generations. We've already seen disasters at Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima. Hanford, just across the border, remains a Superfund site. And radiation risks make nuclear reactors uninsurable, except by national governments. Next slide, please. So the nuclear industry touts itself as being clean, but the reality is that uranium mining, construction of reactors, transportation of equipment and fuel, and site preparation all require large amounts of energy from dirty fossil fuels. For example, so much concrete was used in the Bowie plant in Georgia, that it was the equivalent of paving a sidewalk from Samantha's hometown, Miami, to Seattle. So hardly clean. Next slide. And I think really it's also not needed because really climate change can't wait 10 or 15 years to build these plants, which is generally what it takes. And there are dozens of studies that model a path to a zero carbon grid without nuclear power. And these include studies done at Stanford by Mark Jacobson and at the Rocky Mountain Institute. This book, No Miracles Needed, is a great reference for really understanding the science and what he believes. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Okay, here's your trivia question. Which one of these statements is true? Small modular nuclear reactors have been successfully built in the US. Nuclear power plants are the most cost-effective and timely solution for more energy to power data centers. Despite costing more than twice as much to build as projected, $36 billion, the Bowie plant in Georgia now provides inexpensive electricity to its ratepayers. Or D, passage of House Bill 2410 will give Umatilla residents the ability to overturn the 1980 law prohibiting the construction of nuclear power plants in Oregon. You can put your answer in the chat. Hopefully it's an easy question. Yep. I think everyone got that right.
Yeah.
But I do want to say that this bill, well, someone described it as kind of being analogous to allowing Portlanders to decide whether all of Oregon should have fluoridated water. I mean, it has so much broader impact than just in the Umatilla area. But this bill has been referred to Ways and Means, so it's still alive. And if you agree that this bill would be disastrous to pass, the best thing is to keep it from being referred to assigned to a committee, a subcommittee of Joint Ways and Means. So if you email the Senate President, Rob Wagner, the Speaker of the House, Julie Fahey, and the co-chairs of Ways and Means, Rep. Sanchez and Senator Lieber, and ask them to not assign this bill to a subcommittee, that would be an action that would be really great. And you can also subscribe to tracking the bill in the OLIS system. I don't know if you all know how to do that, but it's quite simple. Up in the right-hand corner of the OLIS website, you can, I can't remember exactly what it says, but it's pretty easy to track. Anyway, thank you. Apologies for my voice.
No worries, and thank you for explaining all those things. And we'll also show folks later on for another action folks can take on a certain bill, how you can e-subscribe. So now we wanted to briefly talk about our Healthy Climate program. And this program, we work on a lot of issues like fossil fuels, dismantling fossil fuel infrastructure, opposing fossil fuel projects, clean energy, clean air, waste incineration, equitable electrification, healthy buildings, and wildfires and human health. And so some of our past wins include shutting down the Jordan Cove liquefied natural gas export facility. Also helping shut down, there's a picture of Melanie at a rally, the Kalama methanol refinery plan. We worked in coalition with a whole bunch of community-based organizations, Verde, and 350 PDX to pass the Portland Clean Energy Fund, which I'm sure you all know is a 1% tax on large companies that those funds are used to fund clean energy projects and climate resilient projects for communities. And we also worked to get the county to study the health impacts and the health threats posed by oil by rail. And this has been super helpful in our fight that we'll talk about a little later on, a local facility called Zenith, who ships crude oil by rail. But this report has also been helpful in our campaign to stop the GTN Express pipeline and campaigns around pipelines and oil by rail in general. And so I'll pass it on to Anne to talk a little bit about our electrification work.
Great. Thank you. So electrification, our goal is really to electrify everything. It seems clear from the science that electrification with clean, renewable energy is the path we need to be on to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Particularly in the building sector, buildings account for about 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, just behind transportation in Oregon. So we know that heat pumps are about 300 times more efficient than the most efficient gas furnace, as are heat pump water heaters and induction stoves. But even though people care about climate change, they care even more about air pollution. And gas appliances pollute both our indoor and outdoor air. Next slide. So in terms of indoor air, cooking with gas, it's very seductive. And maybe we all have kind of an emotional attachment in our reptilian brains to fire. And certainly the restaurant industry and well-known chefs have been paid to market gas stoves. But we know that gas appliances emit really health-harming pollutants that are really the same pollutants that you find in car exhaust. Nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, formaldehyde, and others. And we spend more than 90% of our time indoors, and there aren't any indoor air quality standards. So children are particularly at risk of respiratory illnesses associated with gas stove pollution. A meta-analysis found that there's a 42% increased risk of experiencing asthma symptoms by children and a 24% increased risk of their ever being diagnosed with asthma. Recently, studies from both Harvard and Stanford have found that stoves leak methane even when they're off. And that methane that it leaks contains many hazardous air pollutants, including benzene, for which there are no safe levels. And benzene has been shown to be associated with cancer, particularly the risk of blood cancers. Next slide. So we know that gas stoves are bad actors in polluting our indoor air, but it's really the other gas appliances, furnaces, water heaters, clothes dryers, that are vented outside that pollute our outdoor air and have a much greater impact on climate. So as part of a work group that we were in, Oregon contributed to this report, Oregon's Hidden Air Pollution Problem, fossil fuels in buildings, with our focus being on the health harms of air pollution. And one of the findings, two of the findings are that gas-fueled building equipment contributes significantly to Multnomah County's air pollution, generating 3/4 as much nitrogen oxide pollution as comes from gas power plants across the entire state, and that gas heating equipment is the second largest source of nitrogen oxide pollution in the county behind cars and trucks. So, you know, just as we have emissions standards for cars and trucks, it's clear we need emissions standards for home appliances. You know, it's really somewhere between difficult and I would say impossible to decarbonize the gas industry, but they continue to try. And hydrogen blending is one of those solutions that Samantha is going to tell us about.
Yes. Yes. So just to give you all a bit of background for those who don't know exactly what hydrogen blending is, hydrogen is the most abundant molecule in the universe, but you can't dig it up, you can't frack it, and you can't extract it like fossil fuels, like oil and gas. And so what happens is that hydrogen is almost entirely found in chemical compounds like water and hydrocarbons like methane. And in order to make hydrogen gas, energy is used to separate hydrogen from these compounds. Now, hydrogen as a fuel is classified into different colors depending on the initial molecule being broken down, the energy source being used to take hydrogen from it, and the byproducts of the chemical reaction. And today we want to talk a little bit about turquoise hydrogen because this is something that is happening right here in our city, specifically in Southeast Portland. I think you all have, I think Helena and Melanie worked on a wonderful one pager about this. But essentially, Northwest Natural began blending small amounts of hydrogen into the natural gas system in their Southeast Portland location. And they did this without notifying any of their customers. And they're also doing this using ratepayer money. We worked in coalition with a whole bunch of organizations to put on a community listening session. And from that listening session, Senator Confam actually was inspired to introduce SB 685, which is a hydrogen blending oversight and notification bill. Unfortunately, because of lobbying by Northwest Natural and just backlash from industry, the bill has now been watered down to requiring that gas utilities notify customers of hydrogen at 2.5% or more. And so that was kind of the agreement that they came to. But the percentage will decrease to 0 by June 30th, 2030. And right here we have a picture of the hydrogen blending facility that is also being done in partnership with a company based in Seattle, Washington called Modern Hydrogen. And so another trivia time, another trivia question. Which of these are part of Northwest Natural's green washing campaign? A, Less We Can campaign, encouraging customers to use less energy. B, renewable natural gas. C, turquoise hydrogen. D, coloring books for children about the benefits of natural gas. E, Northwest Natural sponsored fact-finding trip to Denmark for 5 Oregon legislators in September of 2023. Or F, all of the above. What do people think it is? Let's see the chat. F, B, C, D, and E at least. Well, the answer is
Lots of Fs.
absolutely F. Yes. Here we have a picture of the Northwest Natural activity booklets that was sent to schools. It says, natural gas is an efficient fuel for buses, trucks, and cars. Wow. Here is a picture of Senator Solman getting a car ride powered by Senator Lynn Finley during the fact-finding mission in Denmark in September 2023. And then here is a screenshot of Northwest Natural's website section of the Less We Can campaign. And then I think, Melanie, did you want to talk about this slide or?
Yes, I can go ahead and do that now. Thanks, Samantha.
Sure.
So this is another document that came from Northwest Natural. As you know, in this state, the law says that the gas utilities have to decarbonize. Northwest Natural and the other gas utilities have come up with this kind of, I call it a Rube Goldberg scheme. It's very complicated, where initially they're going to rely on, they call anything in this graph, anything that isn't fossil fuel, they call it RNG. So biofuel means the factory, farm factory gas, that's the sort of the orange amount. And the green is hydrogen, and then they get into other ways that they think that they can comply with the state law. Next slide. And as we know, these are kind of crazy. We know that electrification is the right step to take, and many studies have shown that it's the most cost-effective way to decarbonize the use of energy in our home. The problem is that if we do this electrification one house at a time, which is how it's happening today, people like myself who can afford the heat pumps and the solar panels and all that stuff are going to be able to electrify their homes, but the costs are going to be borne by a smaller and smaller number of people who are left on the gas system in what's called a death spiral. Next slide. So there is a better way, and the better way that I'm actually quite excited about this is called thermal energy networks. And this is a way that one can use the very efficient ground temperature to have ground sourced heat pumps that are shared between a number of buildings in on a street or in a neighborhood. So this picture shows the boreholes. Those are the downward facing spikes that you see, which have to go down about 500 or 600 feet, but don't have to reach, you think of geothermal reaching something hot. They don't have to reach anything hot. They just reach that stable underground temperature where a heat pump can be extremely efficient at either heating or cooling. So there is a very nice project going on in Massachusetts. If you're not familiar with it, you can Google Eversource. And what they have done there is they have a pilot project where they've drilled a bunch of these boreholes and they are providing I think it's 125 customers in a number of different homes. Some are single family, some are multifamily, some are commercial buildings. And they're going to connect them all up to this system and see how it works. This is such an exciting idea, I think, in part because it's a way for a just transition, not only for the customers, but also for the workers at the gas utility. And it provides good jobs for the trade. So that's one of the things that this slide is looking at, that you need plumbers, you need HVAC installers, electricians, engineers, people to do the insulation. So I think this is very exciting. And about a dozen other states have passed bills or laws that enable these kind of pilot projects to occur. One of the things that has to happen is there has to be a sort of an exemption from the obligation to serve, because right now, a gas utility, if there are other people on your street who want gas, they are required to give gas to those people. And what we want them to do is be required to provide energy, but not in the form of gas. In other words, they can become thermal utilities. One of the nice things about this is because geothermal is so efficient, it will lead to a probable decreased need to build out the grid because not as much electricity is required for a thermal energy network as would be required if every home had their own heat pumps. Next slide. So there is a bill that's still alive in the Oregon legislature. It's Senate Bill 1143, carried by Kate Lieber. It directs the Public Utility Commission to establish a pilot program that will allow the natural gas company to develop a utility scale thermal energy network pilot project to provide heating and cooling services to customers. A similar bill in Washington state passed unanimously. Every single person in the legislature voted for it. So I have some hope that this will also pass in the Oregon legislature. It is supported by the trades, by the gas utilities, and by a number of climate organizations. This slide also shows how when you're in the OLIS on their website, how you can e-subscribe to a bill. So you can get notification about amendments or about when it's scheduled in a committee. You can kind of follow it through the legislature. So you can do that for any of the bills that we're talking about, whether you're in favor or want to oppose them like the nuclear bills. Next slide. I know most of you are quite familiar with the critical energy infrastructure hub, where 90% of the liquid fuels for the whole state of Oregon are stored on unstable ground, and the likelihood that this will be a disaster equivalent to the Deepwater Horizon and cost billions of dollars. This is going to require a multi-pronged strategy. Not one single thing is going to solve the problem for the CEI hub. But I've been working for the last year and a half, along with Ann and Samantha and a bunch of other people, on a concept called risk bonding. Next slide. So fossil fuel risk bonds, I mean, risk bonds are not a new idea. It's kind of like having to put a damage deposit down when you rent an apartment. But applying it to fossil fuel risk was sort of invented, I guess, by John Talbert, who's an economist, and his wife, Daphne Weisham, about, I would say, 5 to 8 years ago. I forget exactly. So you've heard talk about this. Washington State and King County have passed concepts that are like this, and there is a current bill in the Oregon legislature that would address this. Next slide. So this bill is House Bill 2949, which would require the operators of the liquid fuel terminals in these 3 counties. It's really primarily about the CEI hub here in Portland, to put up monies in various different kinds of financial assurances, which would be able to be tapped in case of a fire, an earthquake, or anything that could otherwise, the cost might otherwise be borne by taxpayers. So this was passed out of the Emergency Management General Government Veterans Affairs Committee. Tweet Tran took over this bill from Michael Dembrow, who has retired. It did pass with a unanimous vote, and its next stop is in Ways and Means. If it passes, then there would be a Rules Advisory Committee that would be appointed. And in the bill, it talks about how this committee would be assembled. It would have a third of the committee would be from the fossil fuel industry, a third from local government, and a third from the community. So everybody on this Zoom call could potentially be a Rules Advisory Committee member, and I encourage you to consider that. Next slide. We don't, since this is a very rapid moving bill, I can't say that OPSR has officially endorsed this bill yet. But if you think that this sounds pretty good. You can look at the bill, you can look it up. It's not a perfect bill. It has some things in it that we don't love, like it has a 300 million cap on how much assurance each facility has to put up, but that cap can be raised by 2030. It also has a preemption for local action. And as some of you know, Multnomah County had been considering whether or not to take action on this topic, although so far they've not been able to do it. But I would say, if you are interested in helping to pass this bill, which I think the state is the place for this bill right now. You can email Representative Sanchez, Senator Lieber. They are the co-chairs of Ways and Means. And then, as Ann mentioned, the leadership of the majority, Rob Wagner and Julie Fahey. Next slide. Pass this back to Samantha, right?
Yes. Yes. So I wanted to briefly give you all a little explanation of the work around stopping zenith, which I briefly mentioned beforehand. Now, if you want to channel your anger into stopping a fossil fuel company, I think this is the fossil fuel company to channel that anger. This is a company that ships crude oil by rail, and it's located in the CEI hub. They transport various types of volatile liquid fuels that are flammable. And of course, like Melanie just mentioned, this is concerning, considering the earthquake risk. Some of these fuels include crude oil, and now they have transitioned into this greenwashing scheme of transporting renewable fuels and something called renewable naphtha, which is actually chemically equivalent to gasoline. So Zenith has been a historic bad actor. They've actually accumulated over 20 violations from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and their operations just pose severe public health and safety risks. And we are trying to shut them down. And I wanted to let you all know about an upcoming action. So Zenith's air contaminant discharge permit, which is essentially a permit that companies need to apply for to emit a certain amount of air pollutants. That hearing for this permit is going to be on May 12th. And there is going to be a rally at 6 p.m. And this will be in person with a virtual option. It's going to be at the University of Portland at the Buckley Center Auditorium. I would encourage you all to sign up to our email action alert list to let you all know about the details about this rally. And then there's going to be a second public hearing on May 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. And so, yeah, these are our social media handles on our website, OregonPSR.org. There's a pop-up box that immediately asks you if you would like to sign up for our email alerts. And so all of these actions that we mentioned today will probably be sent in an email alert in the near future. And here's our Instagram, our Blue Sky, our TikTok, if that's something that you're interested in following. And yeah, thank you all so much for your time and attention and engaging with our trivia questions. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for delivering this amazing presentation to us. And I really wish there were more people here in person, and I guarantee you that some people will watch this after the fact. So I'm sorry it was a small audience. I'm going to start with a question, which is, what does state preemption mean? I am sorry, like, does that mean that the county can't do something if the state does, or?
Yes, there is some language right now in 2949 that basically says that the county can't do something similar and levy additional assurances. There's sort of a general rule that, the federal government takes preemption over the state and the state takes preemption over the county. So we have had some discussion. We got some pro bono time from Crag Law to look into some of the issues in this legislation. And one of the things they said is even if there wasn't that express preemption sentence in the law, there would still be sort of an inherent preemption against the county taking action that could be complicated if it went to court. So one of the things we had been wondering was whether or not we could get that preemption removed from the bill. It turns out that, number one, it's very difficult at this point to amend a bill in the legislature. It's going to go to Ways and Means. It's really hard to do it, and they usually will only look at things related to how much it's going to cost to administer the bill in Ways and Means. And then after that, because Ways and Means is a joint committee of the House and the Senate, it won't go to a Senate committee. And I had a discussion with Michael Dembrow, who was the originator of this bill, this morning, and he confirmed that that was true, that it's not going to go to a Senate committee. And so there's really no way that we can change the language of the bill at this time. That's my understanding.
Thank you.
I had a question about the thermal energy network. Is it practical in an earthquake zone like Portland?
My understanding is that that's not something that really prevents it. First of all, what's being carried in these pipes is usually just water. It's not anything dangerous. And these could be sort of segregated from each other. A lot of Portland is not built on liquefiable soil like the CEI hub is. So there are some places where I can imagine that a thermal energy network might be vulnerable, but I think that's not a huge, huge, huge concern. It's a good question, though. I've never really asked anybody that, so I'm glad you brought it up.
I'm just going to chip in a thought. Right now, there is flammable gas going through all those places. So would you rather have water or flammable gas?
Right. Be better to have water, in my opinion. Yeah. Any other questions?
Thanks for letting us know, Samantha, about that Zenith hearing next month. I didn't realize there was going to be an in-person one, so I imagine there's going to be a big turnout for that.
Yes, we always have pizza and and the big fire truck and big banners, and it's always a good time. So would encourage you all to show up and fight this facility and testify and sign up to testify as well, because they don't quit. Well, if no one else has any other questions, I just wanted to thank you all for, again, the opportunity to talk with you all. It was so great getting to know the Climate Reality Portland chapter, and we weren't sure how the trivia questions were going to go, but I was so happy when people actually started responding in the chat and unmuting themselves. So thank you for participating and listening. Yeah.
And y'all are so smart, you knew most of the answers.
Super intelligent.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for your presentation and all the different ways that we can work with the legislature. We do have an active legislative committee, and you were pointing out things that I was not aware of, so I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
We usually have our chapter business meeting, and we'll have presentations. Usually we have presentations from the education, foods, and legislative committees, and then any other business. And so let's thank our speakers once again. You're welcome to hang around if you would like to. And I would just like to say before closing this part of the meeting that next month, Saturday, May 17th, we're having an in-person social potluck picnic in Washington Park. So come out and smell the roses. The picnic itself is at the Elephant House, which is immediately south, like a 5-minute walk from the Portland Rose Garden. And we're having a noon tour of the Rose Garden with Gretchen Humphrey from the Portland Rose Society. She's a horticulture judge, consulting rosarian, and master rosarian with the American Rose Society. She was president of Portland's Rose Society in 2012 and the Pacific Northwest director of the whole American Rose Society from 2012 to 2017. So if you want to know anything about roses and climate, come out and smell the roses. And there's a wonderful playground right next to the Elephant House. So bring the kids or the grandkids. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you very much.
So, as I said, usually we'd have the education and then the foods committee. Are the Lynn's here?
Lynn Haroon from the Climate Friendly Foods Committee sent me a message that it's her sister's birthday tonight, so she's unfortunately gonna watch after the fact. And I thought Lynn Merrick was going to be here, but Bernadette, are you up to saying anything about the education committee?
Sure. Yeah, our this is the education committee's sort of busy time of year because we're in the process of supporting the climate solution fairs that are happening this year at 4 different middle schools around Portland. So the SAGE Vision 30 program, which is what the Climate Reality Education Committee works with. They're the group that organizes these climate solution fairs. We had the first one last Friday at Robert Gray Middle School right here by where I live in Southwest. It was great. They're really fun. We get about a dozen or 15 vendors and nonprofits and things to come out and talk, set up booths about climate solutions in the gym, and then all the students get to come through over the course of the day. So we did Robert Gray this past Friday. Harriet Tubman is next Friday, and then we'll go to Roseway Heights and Park. What's the name of the school out in East Portland? Park View isn't right. Park something. Parkway, maybe. Anyway, so yeah, over the next month or so, we'll have 4 of these. That's the main thing that we're working on. We encourage volunteers to help out. We have a few booths that our group does, which need volunteers, and then also just sort of general help for the day. So if anybody's interested in volunteering, get in touch with Lynn or myself. That's the main thing. And then once the school year's over, we'll regroup over the summer for new things to do next year.
Thanks, Bernadette. Would you mind to send me the dates that are left? I know with that Providence strike, it threw us into just a turmoil for, oh my gosh, a couple of months trying to catch up, and I didn't know what was going to happen with my schedule, but now it is settled out. So if you let me know the dates, that would be great.
Sure, I can do that. Yeah, it's the next
Thank you.
It's the next 2 Fridays, and then the last one is in early May. Park Rose is Thursday the 15th. So I'll write those 3 dates in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And Bernadette, if you want to put your preferred email in the chat, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you. And I have Lynn's, but I'm just feel like I've been chasing my tail for months. Thank you.
So I will give a little update from what Lynn Haroon sent me about climate-friendly foods. She is absolutely looking for other people to join her to collaborate and plan different events. And she has been giving many presentations herself in the past few weeks at the Environmental Center in Bend, which is near where she lives, and at the Central Community College, Central Oregon Community College, as well as she has an upcoming food waste presentation in June for the city of Florence, where I believe her family has a vacation home. The City of Florence Environmental Management Committee, which is a citizen volunteer committee appointed by the city council. So Lynn is a powerhouse. We have many Lynn's here. Lynn with an E is our climate friendly food committee lead. And she is a powerhouse, and I think would be really wonderful to work with. If anybody's interested in that, I will put her email in the chat. And Amanda, do you want to take a start at legislative committee?
Sure. I guess I could just say in general, the committee has remained very busy as the legislative session has moved on. A lot of bills have kind of been dropped because they didn't meet certain milestones that they were required to meet to continue going through the process. We are still following about 25 bills, including all the ones that were mentioned by Samantha and Melanie. So we're aware of them and tracking them. There will be more opportunities to give testimony. Also, as these bills start making it to the Senate and House floors, we need everybody's help to contact their own legislators to alert them that these bills are going to be voted on and let them know which ones we support and which ones we oppose. So keep an eye out for some action items that you may be emailed. Helena, feel free to add anything to that.
Yeah. If you are interested or you have any questions about legislative stuff, I'm going to put Amanda's direct email in the chat. And then I'm just going to use the climate reality email for myself so it doesn't get too confusing. Because, yeah, that's
Can I
what I'm
ask something about all the wonderful things that are in the chat? Does that get sent, can that be sent out or, or like, I'm just thinking some people, especially some of the content that was discussed that would really be interested in it to, you know, get them on board to listening to some of this stuff. Is that possible?
Yes, absolutely. I will make sure the chat gets saved and I will make sure the chat gets sent.
Yeah, it's a lot of good stuff.